What up, Dan and Amy? And so this story last week was rather interesting. BuzzFeed took out after the hosts of this very popular show, house rehab show called Fixer Upper. You familiar with this show?
I've watched it several times.
Have you?
Yeah.
So you're familiar with
You
Chip.
start watching and you can't stop. That's the problem.
So you're familiar with Chip and Joanna Gaines.
Yes.
They're the co-hosts of this HGTV show called Fixer Upper. And BuzzFeed's Kate Arthur, who is a gay rights activist, decided to inquire as to the Gaines's religious beliefs.
Why?
She
That is
wanted
none
to-
of her business.
She wanted to know if they're against gay marriage and would they ever feature a same-sex couple on the show, because she learned that they attended a church called the Antioch Community Church where the pastor, are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
The pastor believes that God defines marriage and not the state. Wow. So obviously with those extremist views, she wanted to get the Gaines to weigh in. And when they didn't respond to her, she just assumed, as she wrote, in the absence of a response from them or their representatives, it's worth looking at the severe, unmoving position of Siebert, who's the pastor, and Antioch's take on same-sex marriage. So she went after them. Well, it turns out that, as Megan McArdle writes in Bloomberg, that there is no issue. There's no opposition to having a same-sex couple on the show. What happened to the Gaines family makes that feel like a false assurance, though, this idea of not targeting people because of their Christian beliefs. As McArdle writes, BuzzFeed in Bloomberg, BuzzFeed had no evidence that the Gaines family was discriminating. It's true they haven't featured any gay couples on their show, but they live in Waco, Texas. How many gay couples had applied? Maybe is a question to be asked as well. The entire substance of the article is they attended church where the pastor espouses something I find reprehensible. That's McArdle's characterization of Arthur's piece in BuzzFeed, which is true. It was accurate. McArdle goes on to say, what message does this send? Sure, the government won't actually shut down your church, but the left will use its power of positions of institutional power to try and hound anyone who attends church from public life. You can believe whatever you want, but if we catch you, or even if we catch you in proximity to people who believe it, we will threaten your livelihood. Harkens back to Mozilla founder Brendan Eich.
Oh, that's right.
Bounced from the company he founded because he made up a donation to a traditional marriage referendum campaign in California.
Well, the network said that we don't discriminate against the LGBT community in any of our shows. And then Chip Gaines tweeted that in times of trouble, you'll find the Gaines family at church.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
McArdle goes on to conclude, with America seemingly dividing into two countries riven by intractable value differences, it's a lesson that cultural warriors on both sides need to learn. Really, what is the cost to society if two HGTV hosts are allowed to thrive without disavowing their pastors' comments on same-sex marriage? The far greater risk comes from trying to compel them to do so, whether through hard government power or soft private coercion. We can tear windows into the souls of others only at the risk of others tearing holes into us. And isn't that, in part, the revolt that occurred on November 8th with the election of Donald Trump? It is, because you heard evangelicals rallying to Trump, not based on shared values, as Tony Perkins made the point from Family Research Council, but based on the belief, the projection of strength, and the belief that he was going to protect people's constitutional right to practice their faith without hard government power, or to some respect, without soft private coercion either. This is a real matter, and it's something I've said for many, many moons now, and scoffed at. Oh, they just want equality. It's just this, it's just that. Once you start redefining something, an institution like marriage, you don't get to define where the redefining stops. You don't get to draw the line once you've erased them all. And so it is in Ontario, Canada. Bill 28, the state as the de facto parents of children. For more on Bill 28 and the redefinition that goes unchecked once you concede underlying premises like marriage. We're pleased to be joined by Scott Masson, who is an associate professor of English literature at Tyndale University College in Toronto. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be with you.
So explain to us what Bill 28 is and the implications.
Well, Bill 28 is a omnibus legislation that redefines what a family unit is in Ontario. It's called the All Families Are Equal Act. I like to refer to it as the Family is Leveled Act because it removes references to mother and father from over 47 different pieces of family law. It removes those terms and replaces them with various generic terms like parent and birth parent. So mother is removed, and we refer to a birth parent as if someone other than a mother could be giving birth to a child. It's a radical piece of legislation that was brought forward by Canada's foremost transgender activist, Sherry DeNovo, and sponsored by the lesbian premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne. And it passed unanimously because no party dared to even vote against it because they didn't want to be seen as intolerant. Even attempts to amend the legislation were rebutted. The amendments were basically that people be allowed to use mother and father alongside parents, say on identification and so forth, and that was rejected. So now everyone going forward, not just the LGBT families, but every family will have in their official legal documents reference to parents and not to mother and father. So, as I say, it's the leveling of the family. You can echo 1984 in saying all families are equal, but some are more equal than others. So this is a creating a new reality for everyone, and it's just political correctness going to its natural outcome, I think.
Well, Scott, I read an article that most people in Ontario still haven't even heard of Bill 28. Why is the media not picking up on this?
Because the media in Canada, even more so than in the U.S., I think, is largely on board with the progressive agenda. And the media wants to create this new reality, and they do so by talking about things that they want to talk about and by excluding viewpoints that don't fit its own agenda.
So the point I've made about legislation like this, as well as the redefinition of marriage, everybody and others have made this point as well, that the focus is always on gay couples, and life is just about who you love and who loves you back, as our outgoing Illinois Republican Senator Mark Kirk once famously said. And the point about the redefinition of marriage is not a commentary on persons that are gay. It's a commentary on children's natural right to their mother and father. That's what this is about. And it's completely lost on the progressive left, both in the media and academia and society in general. And this is where we go. I mean, people are listening to this. Oh, well, parent one, parent two, mom, dad, what's the difference? The difference is the state intervening to turn children's natural right to their mother and father into little more than a contractual right. And contractual rights, different than natural rights, can be changed at the whim of the state, who you've now empowered to be mother and father. Is that a fair characterization of what 28 is doing?
I think it's a very fair characterization, and I've argued exactly that in print. And as you say, it's gained little traction in the progressive media, who just say, well, it's just it's a minor piece of legislation. And there you go. But it is effectively the state redefining what reality is and suggesting that reality is one that does not include mothers and fathers. And it becomes the God in the institution, effectively. So it's forcing people to use the terms of the new reality that it's trying to create. But that is it. You've got it. And children are the last consideration.
And
in the whole thing.
And as a member of the Academy yourself, English Lit professor at Tyndale University in Toronto, how has this move played out at the K through 12 level, at the university level in Canada? Is it even kind of similar to what's going on in the United States? It's just at a faster pace, or what's going on there?
Well, I think in general people will say that Canada tends to be a bit ahead of the U.S. on the progressivism front, the strength of it, and the way its media is structured in terms of a lot more weight being given to public, the CBC and the public square, and journalism working through that. And so I'd say we're far more advanced, and the consequences are far more serious at this stage, because we really have, alongside that, other legislation which are getting rid of the ability to even disagree with it. So Bill C-16 at the federal government level is against people speaking out against transgender identity, and it's going to criminalize that speech.
So
the
just
University of Toronto.
Just like Canada did with what they consider Islamophobic speech. Mark Stein famously on trial for hate speech in Canada.
Correct, and he won that. He won that case, but that didn't change the push to do that. And so a recent legislation has brought that back on the cards. It's not against anyone in particular; it's against the speech in general, and we'll wait for the particular cases to arise. But it's cultural Marxist regimes, and they have one goal, which is to redefine reality and to put themselves into the position of determining what that reality is, and to keep themselves in power eternally. That's how it works.
And on an ancillary issue, I was in Tucson recently, and I was spinning in a class with a Canadian cycling coach, and he said they have a real problem now because so many transgender men want to join the Canadian cycling team. And he said, but we want to win. So two women didn't make the spot so that two transgenders could be on the team. And so now they're trying to figure out, they want to have a men's team, a women's team, and a transgender team, because I think that's the only way fair for women to compete in women's sports.
The transgender will never accept that.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not about having their own reality. It's about everyone else accepting theirs.
And we just get lost.
Yes,
we're not going to be participating in sports
You're
anymore.
out of sports. That's right. And welcome to everybody who embraced their own demise, their own marginalization.
It hit me when I had that conversation with that cycling coach from Canada.
And by the way, Scott, you were talking about cultural Marxism. You've got a prime minister up there who's apparently a big fan of Marxism. I don't know if he is over the loss that he suffered when Fidel Castro died, but I wonder how Mr. Trudeau's remarks on Castro's passing were received in Canada.
You know what? He was actually mocked here in the media even, although he had his defenders. And in general, Canadians have bought the sort of ridiculous idea that Fidel Castro is some sort of freedom fighter, and that he brought really great things to Cuba, like socialized medicine and socialized education, along with about 57 other communist states, and sort of beacons of democracy like Angola and so forth around the world. But he was actually ridiculed for it and fairly strongly pilloried. I mean, there were Trudeau eulogies hashtags out there. But in general, this is just it doesn't change the reality, I'm afraid. He's pretty firmly entrenched in power. Well,
at least some people got the joke. I mean, it wasn't funny, but at least some people are pushing back against PC-addled rhetoric of Trudeau and so many others. Scott Masson, he is an associate professor of English literature at Tyndale University College in Toronto. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.